Good morning. It's time for more tales from Classic Motor Carriages. Today we're going to go a little bit off our timeline. What we're going to deal with is the daily, and I do mean daily, um, life of a member of the Classic Motor Carriages / Fiber Fab factory. I myself was one at one time and served in a number of different jobs. So, what was it like to work for Classic Motor Carriages? Well, for one, all the employees that worked in the factory had their own specific parking lot. And that parking lot was guarded by gate guard. So that while they were there, nobody messed around with their cars or anything that was in them. And they were free to go to their cars whenever they needed to go to them and leave the property. Okay? But it was a specific parking lot to the left of the main parking lot at the assembly building. They kept my car in there as well. I had my own parking spot where I would park it next to the fence so I could see it all day long. At the time, I had a 1966 Ford Mustang that I was driving. Yes, I did. Work started at basically 6 o'clock in the morning, which means you had to be there before 6 and go into the factory and punch your card as you entered the factory. There was a single post in the front office or in the front of the building where everybody punched in, and it was right outside the the factory supervisor's office. That later became my office as just before Classic Motor Carriages shut down. I also worked in there when I was writing various manuals so that I could be easily found when I was doing other things besides writing just the manuals. So, punch in at 6. You're going to work about 3 hours. And roughly around 9 o'clock, 9:30 is when the roach coach came. I say that like that because the roach coach came at a certain time, and I can't remember exactly when it was. But anyway, you got a 10-minute break after 3 hours of working for Classic. Okay? And then around 12, you got a lunch break. Now, you could either eat lunch a number of different ways. You could bring your own food in, and the Cubans had a little Cuban oven that was made out of plywood and foam and aluminum foil with a single light bulb in it. And they would put their food inside of the oven, and they would have the light on all day, and it kept their food relatively warm. In Miami, mind you, where it gets really hot, all day inside. Now, besides the morning break where you could get something to eat, get something to drink, and you could bring your own food and eat at lunch or eat off the roach coach. And the roach coach came again at 12 o'clock for lunch. There were various spots throughout the factory where there was at least 1 to 2 espresso coffee makers. Now, we're not talking the high-end Starbucks coffee here. We're talking pure Cuban rocket fuel. lots of sugar, coffee that looks like maple syrup, and little tiny cups. Okay? Because you can't drink much more than a little tiny cup of this stuff. You can toss it back in one shot, but man, I tell you, you would be wired for the rest of the day. My personal favorite drink of choice at the time was always Mountain Dew, and the Roach Coach guys, who I knew quite well, always made sure that there was at least one Mountain Dew hidden somewhere for Mike, because I'd come out there and ask for it every time. So, oh yes, we have one for you here, Master Mike. Reach in, pulls it out of the back underneath the shelf, and there was my Mountain Dew. And of course, I'd get either a sandwich or an empanada with chicken inside and eat that. Now, eating empanadas always meant that I had to baptize it with hot sauce, a lot of hot sauce. I always covered the empanada with what you would call Tabasco sauce. It's kind of Cajun jet fuel to go with the Cuban jet fuel, and the hot sauce would prevent the empanada from giving me a bad case of the runs or food poisoning, which is fairly easy to get if you don't smother it in cayenne pepper. And then we work a while longer. We got a afternoon break about halfway through the day, or halfway through the afternoon, around 1:30. We had another break, usually without the Roach Coach coming. The Roach Coach only came twice a day. That was the morning or breakfast time when they came in, and the afternoon or the lunchtime when they came in. The afternoon time was basically your break was for either getting cleaned up, having a cigarette, finishing off your meal from lunch. The afternoon break was 10 minutes long, and getting ready to go home. Then you would go back to work another hour and a half or so, and then you would leave at 3. Now, leaving at 3 meant a lot to me, because that's when I went to my other job. I had I had another job on the other side of Miami, where I restored Mustangs. Remember, I drove a Mustang at the time. But I would drive down to Coral Gables. There was a Mustang shop there, and I would work on Mustangs from the time that I arrived, which generally about 3:30 to 4, until around 9 o'clock at night, at which time I would leave and probably get home at around 11 o'clock at night to eat dinner and go to bed, only to wake up again in the morning before 6 o'clock, get dressed and out the door to Classic first thing in the morning, and repeat the process all over again. There's a lot of music going on in Classic, believe it or not. Every station, it seemed, had its own version of the local Spanish station on it. And there were at least 13 stations in the Finnish end of the Tiffany line. That's the line I worked on. My station at the Tiffany line was the reassembly of the interiors, the reinstallation of all Ford trim hardware. That's including all the pieces that go around the windshield, all the pieces that go hold the door glass in, all the pieces that go on the outside, the door handles and stuff like that. Remember, these are cars that had just come up from the back where they had been painted, and what we did at the finish end of the line was we basically got them ready to dry. My personal part of this was to make sure the interior and all the Ford trim was installed, and it took me roughly a day to get that all done, and that includes putting the carpets back in, by the way. Carpets, back seat, rear quarter panels, interior rear quarter panels, all the trim that goes around the windshield, headliners. I think I did headliners. All the trim that goes around the windshield on the outside, the door post trim and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff I had to put back in, but I was rapidly becoming intimate with the 86, 87, 88 Mercury Cougar interiors, and I actually had to sit down and inventory all the final cars and their missing parts so that I could order everything we needed to complete the last Tiffany's on the assembly line. That was a lot of stuff got broken over the years and cannibalized from one car to the next so that we could complete cars, and it was my job at the end to go through all the parts manuals for the Cougar and make sure we got all the right parts. Now, it seems like a very daunting task until you remember that when I was in the Marines, one of my many jobs was I was an squadron supply NCOIC, wanted to say something else, for for the aviation supply side of the house, which meant that every day I was literally ordering $1 million worth of parts to ensure that our aircraft was fully operational and complete. So doing the Tiffany stuff was not as bad as I had thought it would be. Relearning how to use the Ford IPBs, illustrated part breakdowns, and all their various modifiers so that I got the right color parts. Trust me on this. There was a mauve interior, there was a tan interior, there was a black interior, there were blue interiors, there were red interiors, and I had at least 5 different colors that I had to ensure that all the different pieces I got matched what had already previously been discarded for me because it was broken or missing. So that was a lot of fun, and I did that for a few years. So that Classic was able to close out the Tiffany line, and then we got into the Destiny line. And during this time, when the Tiffany was being closed out, I was transferred to other projects after I got the last car completed and sold. We would still work on Tiffany's from time to time. Basically, every Tiffany in Florida, or every Tiffany within, say, 250 miles of the plant, had to be brought back in and modified. And I think I covered the modification of the steering in the last one, so I won't bore you with that all over again. But they would come in, we'd do certain things. There were always Tiffany's coming in because they had been in wrecks and stuff like that. And the only place you could get a new Tiffany replacement fender would be at Classic Motor Carriages, because the fenders all the way around were changed. And we did that, and part of the process of fixing the fender was to take the whole entire interior out. That's Swear to God. Okay? And send it back through the production line so that it went to the paint or body shop, went to the paint shop, and went back into the finish line. It might even take the place of a Destiny on the finish line, going around the big loop in the front and get fixed. Once the Destinies were done, the Destiny, by the way, for those of you who don't know it, the Tiffany was built on the Mustang, or not the Mustang, but the Mercury Cougar. The Tiffany's, or the Destinies, were built upon the Mustang, which meant that not only could we do, and these are the notchback Mustangs, not the fastbacks. We never built the fastback Destiny. We should have, but we never did. And the reason we never did is because we used part of the molds from the Tiffany on the Destiny. Now, why did we start doing Destinies? Because we bought a lot of the assets from Zimmer Motor Carriages, or Zimmer Motors, and they had built a car on the Mustang, and they had one car that actually had a convertible, and we converted it over from a Zimmer car to a Classic Motor Carriages version of the Tiffany on a Mustang, which we called the Destiny. Probably not the thing you want to know about if you're talking Cobras, but I want you to know that all the different things that Classic Motor Carriages was doing over the years. I mean, it was a big company, and we did a lot of stuff. We built a lot of prototypes. Not all of our prototypes ever made it into production. We also produced a lot of cars, completed cars, while we were there and while it was in business. We're talking about the Neoclassics. Neoclassics are Tiffany, Destiny, where we basically took an original car, cut the nose off, cut the tail off, extended the front, and then put a whole body kit on this. And this is like we also did with the Ultima, which is the replica of the 959 that I built, and I built almost every last one of them in the plant. There was a replica of 595, which eventually parts of that became part of the Speedster line and the form of the 359, which is probably me going over stuff that I've already touched on before. But we did all these things. Now, let's talk about some of the failed ones. Okay, the biggest failure we ever had was trying to turn the Tiffany into a limo. Yes, they did try to do that. There was a man by the name of Harrison who was previously known for his development of a hang on, it'll come to me. Camaro and the Firebird into what was called the Machiavelli. Yes, Harrison came after he was basically shut down by Ferrari, came to Classic Motor Carriages and became the president at Classic Motor Carriages and decided that he was going to be in charge of a project very similar to the Destiny and the Tiffany, only he was going to build a U.S. version of the London Taxi. the London Taxi is quite an unusual car unto itself, and I am going to share with you my experiences with dealing with one of those here shortly. But he decided that besides finishing off the Machiavellis that were due at Classic, mind you, and we did actually complete Machiavelli's at the factory. It was my job, as things had it, is to put the modified rear window hatch, and the Camaro is big glass hatch, beautiful piece of work. But we took and made a fiberglass version, which had a very small rear window, had louvers on the top, and it had to replace the existing glass book, which meant I pulled the glass one out, put the new one in, bent it, shaped it, made it fit properly so that it opened and closed, and that was my job on the Machiavelli assembly line for a period of time. Now, go back to what we're going to call the Cablixi. We call it the Cablixi because it was part cab, part taxi. I'm not the one that made that up. Trust me on that, but I'm not the one that made that. Now, the idea for the Cablixi is it was going to have that unique to London cabs place right next to the driver, mind you, where you shoved your luggage into an open side of the vehicle. You basically, and there's some sort of thing that holds the luggage in while it's driving down the street. It's very easy to get the luggage out, and it's on the same side as the passenger door, the normal exit. Now, I say the normal exit because what they plan to do, or what they plan to use to build the Cablixi, I hate that name, was they were going to use a Plymouth Voyager van. Yes, they were going to take everybody's favorite mom taxi. Okay, and I had one of those, by the way, when I was younger. I had two versions of the mom taxi. I had the Toyota mom taxi, which was a lovely car. I still wish I had it. And I had the Plymouth Voyager mom taxi, and these were driven by my former wife at the time, and they were good cars. But Henderson's plan was to extend the nose to make it look like an Austin London taxi, complete with the frame, the fake front nose, made out of fiberglass and stuff like that, and the luggage carry area next to the driver's seat, and the sliding door on the side that went back, and some sort of something on the back. I can't remember which would give it the taxi look. Now, they were building this back in the back of the factory. There was a specific room at the back of the factory where they hid things they didn't want people to normally see when they toured the factory. I did a lot of work in that room. I built cars in that room. I did a test on the Cougar steering in that room, where we did almost 250,000 cycles of the steering wheel going left, right, as far as it could and as fast as it was. We actually hooked it up to a motor, and this motor went back and forth, and this is how we safety checked the steering linkage that we used to replace the steering cable, so that we knew exactly how many, or what would wear out first. Believe it or not, it was the rack and pinion that wore out first, and I eventually had to replace it on that particular car, um, along with the power steering pump and such. But other than that, the car, I mean, we ran that car for almost a week like that. And every night, we never shut down the car. We actually fueled it while it was running. We had the front wheels off of the ground so that we wouldn't wear a hole in the floor and stuff like that. But anyway, that particular area is where we put the Cablixi. And that particular area also had my writing office. It was more like a closet with a window looking out into where the Cablixi was being modified for the we were trying to make the molds off of it and make a good shape and stuff like that. Well, one day some scurrilous cad wrote on the Cablixi windshield, because there was a fair amount of fiberglass dust on it, fugly. I'm sure I don't have to explain to you what the meaning of fugly is. It's a mash together of two words, and the back half is ugly. Well, somebody wrote fugly on there, and the next day, for some unknown reason, the owner of Classic Motor Carriages came in, looked at the Cablixi, saw the writing on the wall or the windshield, and agreed. And Henderson was quickly given the boot, and with that ended the Tiffany limousine project, which was, I don't even want to go into that. It's a horrible attempt at, and we kept that car for many years, and it was literally a disaster. And the Cablixi, and oddly enough, the Machiavellis all disappeared at roughly the same time. And I got to cut up an actual 1959 Austin London taxi with a torch. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to tell you something about Austin taxis. You don't know this, but you can trust me on this. They have two frames, believe it or not. They have a really solid steel frame, and inside of that really solid steel frame, there's another completely equally solid inner frame. These cars, the London taxis, believe it or not, are made to last for literally thousands of years. They do not bend, they do not break, and they are hell to cut up. While I was cutting this thing up, and I was cutting it up because Henderson didn't want it anymore, and the Classic didn't want it anywhere on the property, I was attacked by hornets and wasps, because they had stored this thing outside, and the hornets and wasps had got in there, and while I was torching it and cutting it into little tiny pieces that would fit into the metal dumpster, I was attacked by wasps and hornets and got several stings, and almost ended up going to the hospital because of pain. I had never been stung by a wasp or a hornet before. But let me tell you, these days I avoid them like the plague, because I literally exploded from the shock of being bit. I mean, every part of my body blew up. Like it just swolled up like a Jimmy Dean sausage in the microwave. Yeah, and to the point where I thought my skin was going to burst. So did Classic. But I got through that, went back later on, and went back at that thing with a vengeance. First thing I did was I took my acetylene torch and toasted every last wask I could find before going back to cutting it up. Now the engine, believe it or not, was a diesel motor, and the engine and transmission went to one of our workers at the factory. He asked us if he could have it. They said, sure. You just get it out of Mike's way when he's done cutting up that area and just take it with you. That later went on a boat, believe it or not, because it was a good diesel engine, and one of our Cuban workers had this 38-foot boat, sans an engine, in his backyard in Hialeah that he was building so that whenever the Castros fell out of favor and died off, he could take it back to Cuba and rescue what little family he still had left there. So that's the story of the Cablixi. That's the story of working at Classic Motor Carriages during the day. We're going to get into other things on the next video for this, and the other things will be essentially we're going to get into the downside of, or the what caused the collapse of Classic Motor Carriages, at least from my point of view. We've already touched on it a little bit, so in this video there is a bit of a precursor or a foretelling of what actually happened. And we can blame it all on the finish line. But that's a story for another day. And this is Mike, over and out.